11 scary legends of ice and snow from around the world. These chilling tales come from the coldest corners of the earth, where the ice and snow hold more than just natural beauty. From haunting spirits to ancient curses, these legends have terrified generations. Bundle up and prepare for a journey through the frozen unknown. Legend number 1. In the icy, snow-covered forests of North America, particularly in the remote wilderness of Canada and the northern United States, the legend of the Wendigo has haunted people for centuries. Originating from the folklore of the Algonquin-speaking tribes, the Wendigo is said to embody the harshness of winter, the dangers of isolation, and the darkness that lies within the human spirit. The Wendigo is described as a towering, emaciated creature, its skeletal frame stretched unnaturally tall, with skin so thin and pale it clings tightly to its bones. Its lips are torn and blackened, revealing rows of jagged, rotting teeth, and its eyes, sunken, hollow voids, seem to glow faintly in the darkness. The Wendigo's breath freezes the air around it, and its long, clawed hands can tear through even the sturdiest of barriers. But what makes the Wendigo truly terrifying is its origin. According to legend, it was once human, a hunter, a traveler, or even a settler who, in a moment of desperation during the harsh winter months, turned to cannibalism to survive. That act of consuming human flesh cursed them, transforming them into a monster consumed by an insatiable hunger for more. The Wendigo isn't just a warning about physical survival, it's a lesson in spiritual decay. It is said to prey on greed and selfishness, corrupting the desperate with whispers of false promises. Many legends speak of people lost in the woods who claimed they heard voices calling to them on the wind, urging them to take what wasn't theirs or betray those they loved. By the time the Wendigo strikes, its victim is already broken in spirit. One of the most chilling accounts of the Wendigo comes from a trapper named Samuel in the 19th century. Samuel had been trapped in a cabin during a brutal snowstorm, miles from the nearest settlement. With his food supplies dwindling and the storm showing no sign of letting up, he began hearing strange noises outside, scratching at the walls and faint whispers carried by the howling wind. On the third night, Samuel opened the door, believing it might be an animal he could kill for food. Instead, he came face to face with the Wendigo. It stood motionless, its elongated limbs brushing the ground, and its glowing eyes locked onto him. Its breath formed clouds of frost in the icy air, and Samuel swore he heard it whisper his name. Terrified, Samuel slammed the door and barricaded it, but the creature didn't leave. For hours, it circled the cabin, its claws scraping against the walls and windows. Sometimes it would whisper in a low, guttural tone, words Samuel couldn't understand, but that filled him with a primal dread. When the storm finally broke, the Wendigo was gone. But Samuel was found days later, rambling incoherently about the voice that had begged him to let it in. Even now, hikers, hunters, and campers in the northern forests report hearing eerie cries echoing through the trees. These cries often sound human, like someone calling for help, but they carry an unnatural, chilling undertone. Others speak of seeing fleeting shadows, impossibly tall and thin, darting between snow-covered trees, always just out of reach. The Wendigo isn't just a monster, it's a manifestation of the wilderness itself, cold, unrelenting, and indifferent to human life. For those who venture into its territory, the frozen silence of the forest is no longer their greatest enemy. And for the few who survive an encounter, the Wendigo's whispers stay with them, haunting their thoughts long after the snow has melted. In the heart of winter's grip, when the wind carries voices and shadows flicker in the snow, the legend of the Wendigo reminds us of a simple truth. Some hungers can never be satisfied, and some things in the forest should never be followed. Legend number 2. In the mountainous regions of Japan, where the snow falls thick and heavy and the wind howls through icy valleys, there is a legend that has been passed down for centuries. The tale of Yuki Onna, the Snow Woman. Beautiful yet terrifying, she is said to appear during snowstorms, gliding silently through the drifts, searching for her next victim. Yuki Onna is often described as tall and ethereal, her skin as pale as freshly fallen snow, and her long black hair flowing like a shadow against the white backdrop. Her kimono, also white, blends seamlessly with the snow, making her almost impossible to see until she is right in front of you. But her most striking feature is her eyes, cold, piercing, and hauntingly beautiful. Those who meet her gaze often find themselves unable to move, as if frozen by her very presence. The legend varies from region to region, but one common thread ties them all together. Yuki Onna appears during the harshest of snowstorms, targeting travelers who have lost their way. Some say she lures them with her beauty, appearing helpless and asking for assistance. Others claim she simply appears out of nowhere, her cold breath freezing her victims where they stand. One of the most chilling stories of Yuki Onna comes from the Niigata prefecture, where a young woodcutter named Takeshi was caught in a snowstorm while gathering firewood. As the snow piled higher and the wind whipped around him, he saw her, a woman standing alone in the storm, her white kimono billowing but untouched by the wind. "Are you lost?" Takeshi called out, though his voice barely carried over the howling wind. The woman turned to him, her black hair falling over her shoulders, and smiled. "I am cold," she said softly. "Will you help me?" Against his better judgment, Takeshi approached her. As he drew closer, he felt the air grow colder, each breath searing his lungs like ice. When he reached her, he realized something was wrong. Her bare feet left no prints in the snow, and her breath didn't fog in the freezing air. Before he could react, her smile disappeared, and her eyes turned sharp and unkind. She leaned in close, and her breath, colder than the fiercest wind, washed over him. Takeshi's body began to freeze from the inside out, his limbs locking in place as his vision blurred. The next morning, his body was found, frozen solid in the snow, his expression twisted in terror. Locals say that Yuki Onna spared him no mercy, as she rarely does. However, in some versions of the legend, Yuki Onna isn't entirely without compassion. Another tale speaks of a traveler who encountered her but begged for his life, promising he would never speak of her. She allowed him to live, but years later, he broke his promise and told his wife about the ghostly woman he had met. That night, his wife revealed herself to be Yuki Onna in disguise and vanished into the snow, leaving him forever haunted by her betrayal. To this day, during heavy snowstorms in Japan, locals warn travelers not to wander too far from safety. They say that Yuki Onna still roams the mountains, her icy breath ready to claim the lives of those foolish enough to cross her path. Her legend is more than a ghost story. It's a chilling reminder of the unforgiving power of nature. In the face of the snow and the cold, even the most seasoned traveler can fall victim to her frozen beauty. And for those who hear her soft, haunting voice on the wind, it may already be too late. Legend number 3. In the harsh, frozen landscapes of Iceland, where the wind howls across desolate snowfields and the mountains are cloaked in ice, there is a legend that warns of a force more terrifying than the cold itself: the White Death. The White Death is not a creature, but a deadly phenomenon said to follow travelers who venture too far into the snow alone. Locals describe it as a mysterious, otherworldly blizzard that appears without warning, enveloping its victims in an inescapable storm. Those caught within it are said to hear whispers carried on the wind and see shadowy figures moving just beyond their line of sight. The legend of the White Death has its roots in Iceland's unforgiving winters. For centuries, stories have been told of farmers, hunters, and explorers who set out on routine journeys only to vanish without a trace. Days or weeks later, Their bodies would be found frozen, their faces twisted in expressions of pure terror. One of the most infamous tales dates back to the early 1900s, when a young man named Arnar set out from his village to visit a neighboring settlement. It was a trip he had made many times before, and the weather that morning was clear and calm. But as he reached the halfway point of his journey, the sky darkened, and a fierce wind began to blow. Snow swirled around him, and within minutes he was caught in a blizzard so intense he could barely see his own hands. Arnar tried to press on, but the storm seemed to have a mind of its own. The snow pushed against him no matter which direction he turned, and the whispers began, a faint, eerie murmuring that seemed to come from the storm itself. "Arnar," the voices called, his name barely audible over the howling wind. Terrified, he spun in circles, trying to locate the source, but there was nothing, only the white wall of snow. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw a figure. It was tall and cloaked in snow, its features indistinct, but its presence undeniable. The figure moved silently, gliding through the storm as if it were part of it. Arnar called out, desperate for help, but the figure did not respond. It simply stopped and turned to face him. Its eyes, or what he thought were eyes, glowed faintly in the storm, and Arnar felt an overwhelming sense of dread. He turned and ran, the snow dragging at his feet and the whispers growing louder. Days later, Arnar's body was found by a search party. He was frozen solid, curled in a fetal position, and his face was locked in an expression of sheer horror. The strange part, though, was his location. He had been found less than a mile from his village, even though he should have been far closer to his destination. To this day, Icelanders warn travelers to stay close to shelter during snowstorms. The White Death, they say, isn't just a blizzard. It's a malevolent force that preys on the lost, the desperate, and the reckless. Some believe the shadows seen in the storm are spirits of those who have died within it, doomed to wander the snow forever. Others claim the whispers are the storm itself, taunting its victims as it leads them astray. Whether it's the wrath of nature or something far more sinister, the White Death remains one of Iceland's most feared legends. And for those who hear the whispers or see the shadows in the storm, the end has already begun. Legend number 4. In the snowy mountains of Italy, particularly in the remote villages tucked within the Apennine range, the legend of La Befana has been told for centuries. While many know her as a kind, witch-like figure who brings gifts to children during Epiphany, there is a darker, more sinister version of her story, one that warns of the dangers of encountering her on a cold winter's night. La Befana is often described as an elderly woman, cloaked in tattered robes, with a bent back and a broomstick in hand. Her appearance might seem harmless, even comical, but beneath her wrinkled face and kind smile lies a being capable of punishing those who cross her. In some versions of the legend, La Befana roams the snow-covered paths and forests during the coldest winter nights, searching for those who have lost their way or their sense of kindness. Those who are pure of heart may find her offering warmth or guidance, but those who are selfish, cruel, or greedy often meet a far darker fate. One chilling tale comes from a small village high in the mountains. It's said that a young man named Pietro, known for his arrogance and disrespect toward the villagers, decided to mock the old stories of La Befana. One snowy evening, while walking back from a friend's home, he declared loudly to the wind, "I fear no witch. Let her come if she dares." The snowstorm grew fiercer as he walked, and the light from his lantern barely pierced the darkness. As he climbed the narrow mountain path, he noticed a figure ahead of him, a hunched woman, struggling with a heavy sack over her shoulder. "Who walks here so late?" Pietro called out, his voice echoing against the cliffs. The woman turned to him, her face hidden beneath the shadows of her hood. "A poor old woman, trying to make her way home," she replied in a cracked voice. "Might you help me carry my burden?" Pietro laughed cruelly. Carry your burden? I think not. You can manage just fine on your own. The woman tilted her head, her face still obscured. Are you sure, Pietro? She asked, her tone icy. The young man froze. How do you know my name? The woman didn't answer. Instead, she dropped the sack, and as it hit the ground, a sound like faint, muffled cries emerged from within. Pietro took a step back, fear finally overtaking his bravado. The woman straightened, her hunched frame growing taller, her shadow stretching unnaturally across the snow. When she threw back her hood, her face was no longer that of a frail old woman. It was gaunt and hollow, her eyes burning with an otherworldly light. You mocked me, she hissed, her voice echoing like the wind. And now you will learn the weight of your words. The next morning, villagers found Pietro near the base of the mountain path. He was alive but barely, his body frozen stiff and his eyes wide with terror. He muttered incoherently about the shadow and the sack, but he never spoke clearly of what happened that night. From then on, the villagers respected the legend of La Befana. To this day, they warn travelers not to dismiss her as mere folklore. They say she still roams the snowy paths, her broomstick sweeping away the tracks of those she takes, and her sack always ready for the unworthy. La Befana's tale is a reminder that kindness and humility are rewarded, even in the harshest of winters, and that the icy mountain paths are no place to tempt the supernatural. For those who meet her, mercy is not guaranteed. Legend number 5. In the snow-covered forests of Eastern Europe, where the winters are long and merciless, there is a legend that speaks of malevolent spirits known as dybuks. These restless entities, said to be the souls of the wicked or the tormented, are believed to wander the frozen woods, seeking bodies to possess and minds to corrupt. The legend of the dybuk takes on an especially chilling form during the harshest winters, when the snow falls so heavily that the forests become labyrinths of white and shadow. Many warn that the dybuk thrives in isolation, preying on travelers who stray too far from safety. One such tale is that of a young man named Marek, who worked as a woodsman in the Carpathian Mountains. Marek was known for his bravery, venturing deep into the forest even during the coldest months to gather firewood for his family. But one fateful winter, he encountered something that no courage could protect him from. The story begins on a bitterly cold evening, as Marek was making his way back to his village with a sled full of firewood. The sun had set, and the forest was eerily quiet, the only sound the crunch of snow under his boots. He was halfway home when he noticed something strange, a figure standing motionless between the trees. At first, Marek thought it might be another traveler, but as he approached, he realized the figure wasn't moving at all. It was tall and thin, with a dark cloak that seemed to blend into the shadows. Its face was obscured, but Marek could feel its gaze boring into him. "Do you need help?" Marek called out, his voice echoing through the stillness. The figure didn't respond. Instead, it tilted its head, as if studying him. Marek felt a chill run down his spine that had nothing to do with the cold. Something in his gut told him to leave, and he hurried past the figure, dragging his sled behind him. But as he continued, he began to hear whispers. They were faint at first, barely audible, but they grew louder with each step. The voices spoke in a language Marek didn't understand, but their tone was unmistakable, mocking, cruel, and filled with malice. The forest seemed to close in around him, the trees growing darker and more twisted. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw movement. The figure was following him, gliding silently over the snow. No footprints marked its path, and its shadow stretched unnaturally long across the frozen ground. Marek began to run, his sled abandoned as he stumbled through the snow. The whispers turned into guttural growls, and he felt the air around him grow heavy, pressing down on his chest. He tripped and fell, and as he scrambled to his feet, he saw the figure standing directly in front of him. Its face was now visible, and Marek wished he hadn't looked. Its features were twisted and decayed, its hollow eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. The Dybbuk reached out with a skeletal hand, and Marek felt a searing cold pierce his chest. The next morning, Marek was found by a group of villagers who had gone searching for him. He was alive but barely, his skin pale and his eyes wide with terror. He muttered incoherently about voices and shadows, and he refused to return to the forest ever again. In the years that followed, Marek became a recluse, rarely speaking and never venturing beyond the village. When asked about what he saw that night, he would only say one thing: "The forest has taken many, but it let me go to warn the rest." To this day, villagers in the region warn travelers not to enter the forest during winter, especially alone. They say the Dybbuk still roams the woods, searching for those who are lost, vulnerable, or foolish enough to ignore the signs. The whispers in the wind, the shadows that seem to move on their own, they're not tricks of the mind. They're the Dybbuk, waiting to claim another soul. And for those who hear the whispers, the warning is clear: turn back before it's too late. Legend number 6. In the rolling, snow-dusted hills of Ireland, where winter winds howl across the barren countryside, there is a chilling legend that warns of a banshee who appears during the fiercest blizzards. Unlike the traditional tales of the banshee as a harbinger of death, this ghostly figure is said to actively lure victims into the storm, ensuring they never return. The legend dates back centuries, when harsh winters would trap families in their homes for days, even weeks. During these storms, villagers would claim to hear a wailing cry cutting through the howling wind. It was said that if you ventured out to find the source of the sound, you would be lost forever, frozen in the storm with a look of terror etched onto your face. One such tale involves a farmer named Eamon, who lived alone on a small plot of land near the Wicklow Mountains. One winter, a blizzard struck unexpectedly, burying his fields under several feet of snow. Late that night, as the wind battered his small cottage, he heard it, a mournful, high-pitched wail drifting through the storm. Eamon froze, his blood running cold. He knew the stories of the banshee, but the sound was so heart-wrenching, so human, that he couldn't ignore it. "Someone's out there," he muttered to himself, grabbing his lantern and heavy coat. The moment he stepped outside, the wind cut through him like a blade. The snow whipped around in chaotic swirls, and the wailing grew louder, seeming to come from somewhere just beyond his field. "Hello?" he shouted into the storm. "Is someone there?" There was no response, only the haunting cry. Determined to help, Eamon trudged through the snow, following the sound as it led him deeper into the white abyss. The further he went, the louder the wailing became, until it was almost unbearable, a piercing shriek that made his ears ache. Then he saw her. A figure stood in the snow, her long, tattered dress billowing in the wind. Her hair was wild and black as night, and her face was pale and gaunt, her mouth open in a scream that didn't stop. Eamon froze, his lantern shaking in his hand. The banshee turned toward him, her hollow eyes locking onto his, and for a moment, the storm seemed to pause. Suddenly, she rushed toward him, her cry reaching a deafening pitch. Eamon stumbled back, dropping his lantern, and ran as fast as he could, the snow dragging at his legs. Behind him, the wailing continued, chasing him through the blizzard. When he finally reached his cottage, he slammed the door shut and bolted it, collapsing onto the floor. The wailing continued outside, circling the house, until dawn broke and the storm began to subside. Eamon survived, but he was never the same. He refused to leave his home during winter storms and often muttered about the woman in the snow who had tried to claim him. To this day, during fierce blizzards in Ireland, people say you can still hear the banshee's cry. Some believe she is the spirit of a woman who died alone in the cold, cursed to wander the storms forever. Others say she is a vengeful ghost, luring travelers to their deaths. Whatever the truth may be, one thing is certain. If you hear the banshee's wail during a snowstorm, stay where you are. Her cry isn't a call for help. It's a warning that the storm isn't the only thing out there. Legend number 7. In the icy tundras and dense forests of Siberia, where temperatures plummet and survival is a daily struggle, there exists a legend of the Chuchuna, a shadowy humanoid creature that roams the snow-covered wilderness. Described as both predator and protector, the Chuchuna is a figure of fear and fascination among the nomadic tribes and remote villagers who call this frozen land home. The Chuchuna is said to stand nearly 8 feet tall, its body covered in thick, matted fur to withstand the brutal Siberian cold. Its eyes are piercing and intelligent, glowing faintly in the dark, and its movements are eerily silent, even in deep snow. Some believe it is a distant cousin of the Yeti, while others insist it is something far older and more sinister, an ancient spirit that preys on those who dare to trespass too far into the wilderness. One chilling story comes from a nomadic reindeer herder named Nikolai, who claimed to have encountered the Chuchuna while traveling through the remote forests near the Kamchatka Peninsula. Nikolai had been following his herd during a particularly harsh winter, the snow piling higher with each passing day. Late one night, as he sat by his fire in the middle of the woods, he noticed an unsettling silence. The usual sounds of the forest, branches creaking under the weight of snow, the distant howl of wolves, had disappeared. All that remained was the soft crackle of his fire and the rhythmic breathing of his reindeer. Then he saw it. Standing just beyond the firelight was a towering figure, its fur-covered body blending almost seamlessly with the shadows. At first, Nikolai thought it might be a bear, but as his eyes adjusted to the darkness, he realized it was something else entirely. The creature was upright, its long arms hanging down to its sides, its head tilted slightly as if studying him. For what felt like an eternity, the two stared at each other, neither moving. Nikolai's breath caught in his throat as he noticed the faint glow of the creature's eyes, intelligent and calculating. He slowly reached for his rifle, but before he could lift it, the Chuchuna took a single, deliberate step forward. It made no sound, not even the crunch of snow beneath its feet. Nikolai's instincts screamed at him to run, but he was frozen in place, his fingers trembling around the rifle. Then, without warning, the Chuchuna let out a low, guttural growl that seemed to vibrate through the air. It wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that sent chills through Nikolai's entire body. Terrified, he fired his rifle blindly into the darkness. The shot echoed through the forest, and when the smoke cleared, the Chuchuna was gone. Nikolai didn't sleep for the rest of the night, his eyes darting constantly to the edge of the firelight. The next morning, he found massive tracks in the snow leading away from his camp, tracks that disappeared abruptly, as though the creature had vanished into thin air. When he returned to his village and told his story, the elders nodded solemnly. They warned him that the Chuchuna does not like to be disturbed and that its presence is both a blessing and a curse. Some believe it protects the forest, driving away those who seek to exploit it. Others insist it is a predator, stalking the vulnerable and taking those who wander too far alone. To this day, travelers in Siberia report strange encounters with shadowy figures in the snow, accompanied by eerie silence and the feeling of being watched. Whether the Chuchuna is a creature of flesh and blood, or an ancient spirit tied to the frozen wilderness, one thing is clear: those who encounter it are forever changed. In the endless expanse of Siberia's icy wilderness, where the line between the natural and the supernatural blurs, the legend of the Chuchuna serves as a stark reminder. Some places are not meant to be disturbed, and for those who venture too deep, the shadows may hold more than just the cold. Legend number 8. In the majestic yet unforgiving Swiss Alps, where winter blankets the peaks in thick layers of snow and the icy winds howl through the valleys, there is a legend that has terrified villagers for generations: the Snow Hag. This ancient crone is said to haunt the mountains during the coldest months, punishing those who disrespect the land or venture too far into the frozen wilderness. The Snow Hag is described as a hunched, gnarled figure, draped in tattered robes made of frost-covered fabric. Her face is gaunt and pale, her eyes piercing an icy blue, glowing faintly in the darkness. She carries a crooked staff, and her breath is said to chill the air, freezing the ground where she steps. But it's her clawed hands that villagers fear most, for they leave deep, gouging marks in the snow, marks that serve as warnings to stay away. One of the most well-known tales of the Snow Hag comes from a young shepherd named Lucas, who lived in a small mountain village. Lucas was known for his arrogance, often mocking the old traditions and ignoring the warnings of the elders. One particularly harsh winter, he decided to take his sheep higher into the mountains, believing the grazing fields above the tree line would still have some grass beneath the snow. "Stay away from those peaks," the village elder warned. "They belong to her." But Lucas scoffed. "It's just an old woman's tale. The only thing up there is snow and sheep food." The journey was treacherous, but Lucas eventually reached the upper pastures. The snow was deeper than he'd anticipated, and the wind bit at his face, but he was determined to prove the villagers wrong. As night fell, Lucas set up a small shelter and built a fire, the warmth barely keeping the cold at bay. As he sat near the flames, he heard it, a faint, scratching sound coming from the darkness. He froze, his heart pounding as the sound grew louder, circling his camp. "Who's there?" he called out, gripping his staff tightly. The only response was the wind. When morning came, Lucas found deep, jagged claw marks in the snow around his camp. He dismissed them as the work of a wild animal, but unease gnawed at him. Despite the strange events, he pressed on, determined to find better grazing land. That night, the scratching returned, louder and closer than before. Lucas peered into the darkness, his firelight flickering against the trees, and then he saw her. The Snow Hag stood just beyond the edge of the light, her hunched figure looming like a shadow over the snow. Her eyes glowed like shards of ice, and her clawed hand gripped a twisted staff. "Why have you come here?" she rasped, her voice like the wind through the mountains. Lucas stammered, unable to answer as she stepped closer, her breath freezing the air between them. "You mock the mountains," she said. "You take what does not belong to you." Terrified, Lucas grabbed his staff and swung it at her, but she moved faster than he thought possible, her claws slashing through the air. The fire went out with a gust of wind, plunging him into darkness. When the villagers found Lucas 2 days later, he was alive but barely. His face was pale, his lips blue, and his hands frozen stiff. Deep claw marks stretched across his chest, though no blood had spilled from them. He muttered incoherently about her eyes and the cold that spoke. The villagers took Lucas back to the village, but he never recovered. He spent the rest of his days warning others to respect the mountains and to never venture too far into the snow. To this day, hikers and mountaineers in the Alps speak of strange claw marks in the snow, of shadows that move where no shadows should be, and of an overwhelming chill that seems to follow them down the trails. The Snow Hag's tale is a reminder of the unforgiving power of the Alps. She is said to be the mountain's protector, punishing those who take too much and warning those who wander too far. For those who cross her, mercy is as fleeting as warmth in the biting cold. Legend number 9. In the icy reaches of Scandinavia, where the frozen sea meets desolate snow-covered shores, there is a legend older than the Viking sagas, the Arctic Draugr. These undead spirits are said to haunt the coastlines and frozen waters, rising from their icy graves to punish the living. The Draugr are described as grotesque figures, their frost-bitten skins stretched tightly over decaying flesh. Their eyes glow an eerie blue, and their presence is often accompanied by the stench of death and a bone-chilling cold that freezes the air around them. They are said to be the restless spirits of those who died violently or with unresolved hatred, sailors lost at sea, betrayed warriors, or victims of treachery. The Draugr are not bound to their graves. They roam the frozen landscape, their icy footsteps leaving no trace, and their purpose is vengeance. Legends say they hunt those who disturb their resting places, whether by accident or greed, and drag them to a watery death beneath the ice. One of the most terrifying tales of the Draugr comes from a 17th century fishing village along the Norwegian coast. According to the story, a group of fishermen set out during a particularly harsh winter, desperate to bring back food for their starving families. Despite warnings from the elders to avoid a nearby fjord, believed to be cursed, they ventured into its icy waters, lured by the promise of plentiful fish. The fjord was silent and still, the water black as ink beneath the thick sheets of ice. The fishermen set their lines, their breath fogging in the freezing air, and waited. But as they worked, strange things began to happen. First, the air grew colder, an unnatural chill that bit through their thick coats. Then came the sound, a faint, rhythmic knocking from beneath the ice, as though something was trying to break through. One of the men, Lars, leaned over the side of the boat to peer into the water. What he saw made his blood run cold. A pale, skeletal face stared back at him from beneath the ice, its glowing blue eyes locked onto his. Its mouth twisted into a grotesque grin, and its claw-like hands began scratching at the underside of the ice, the sound echoing in the still air. Lars screamed, and the others rushed to his side, but it was too late. The ice cracked, and a hand shot out, gripping his leg with an inhuman strength. The Draugr pulled him under, his screams muffled as the freezing water closed over him. The remaining fishermen tried to flee, but the fjord itself seemed to turn against them. The ice beneath their boat cracked and groaned, and shadowy figures rose from the water, their glowing eyes piercing through the darkness. One by one, the men were dragged into the icy depths, their cries swallowed by the cold. Days later, pieces of their boat were found washed ashore, but the men were never seen again. The villagers, terrified, abandoned the fjord, declaring it cursed. To this day, locals avoid the area, especially during the winter months. Hikers and explorers who venture too close to the fjord tell of strange occurrences. The sound of footsteps crunching in the snow when no one is there, ghostly blue lights flickering over the water, and the faint knocking of something trying to break through the ice. The Arctic Draugr is more than a ghost story. It is a warning. In the frozen north, where the boundaries between life and death blur, disturbing the dead is a risk few are willing to take. For those who ignore the warnings, the icy depths await, and the Draugr's vengeance is as cold and unforgiving as the winter itself. Legend number 10. In the towering snow-covered peaks of the Himalayas, where the air is thin and the cold is relentless, there exists a legend as old as the mountains themselves, the Yeti. Known as the abominable snowman in the West, this massive ape-like creature has been a source of fear and fascination for centuries among those who call the Himalayas home. The Yeti is said to stand over 8 feet tall, its body covered in thick, matted fur that ranges from white to dark brown, allowing it to blend seamlessly with its snowy surroundings. Its eyes are deep-set and glowing, and its massive footprints, far larger than a human's, are often the first sign of its presence. According to Himalayan folklore, the Yeti is more than just a beast. It is seen as a guardian of the mountains, fiercely protective of its territory and sacred sites. Those who show respect may pass through unscathed, but those who dare to desecrate the land or disrespect the natural order risk invoking its wrath. One chilling tale comes from a group of mountaineers who attempted to climb a remote peak in Nepal during the 1950s. The expedition was plagued with strange occurrences from the start. Unexplained equipment failures, the disappearance of supplies, and an overwhelming sense of being watched. One night, as they camped near the base of the peak, the team heard a series of deep, guttural growls echoing through the valley. Thinking it might be a snow leopard, they dismissed it and tried to sleep. But the growls continued, growing closer, accompanied by heavy, crunching footsteps in the snow. The next morning, they found massive footprints circling their camp, each one nearly twice the size of a human foot. The tracks led away into the snow, but none of the team members dared to follow them. Determined to continue their climb, the group pressed on. But as they ascended, the strange occurrences escalated. One climber claimed to see a large, shadowy figure watching them from a ridge, its glowing eyes visible even in the bright sunlight. Another found his pack shredded, as if by enormous claws, with its contents scattered across the snow. The final encounter came on the third night. As the team prepared to sleep, a sudden, deafening roar shattered the stillness. The roar was unlike anything they had ever heard, deep and primal, reverberating through the mountains. The climbers scrambled out of their tents to see a massive figure standing at the edge of their camp. The Yeti towered over them, its fur glistening with frost, its eyes burned with a fierce intelligence, and its massive hands clenched into fists. For a moment, it simply stared at them, as if weighing its decision. Then it let out another earth-shaking roar and turned, disappearing into the shadows of the mountain. The climbers abandoned their expedition the next morning, too terrified to continue. When they returned to the village, the locals nodded knowingly at their story. "They said the Yeti," they said. "You must have angered it." In the years since, countless expeditions have reported strange encounters in the Himalayas, unexplained footprints, sightings of shadowy figures, and the feeling of being watched. Some believe the Yeti is a relic of an ancient species, while others insist it is a guardian spirit, protecting the sacred peaks from those who seek to conquer them. Whether it is a beast, a spirit, or something else entirely, one thing is certain: the Yeti is more than a legend. In the cold, unforgiving expanse of the Himalayas, where survival is already a struggle, the thought of something watching from the shadows makes the mountains even more formidable. For those who venture too far, the Yeti is a reminder that not all of nature's secrets are meant to be uncovered. And for those who meet its gaze, respect is the only hope for survival. Legend number 11. In the snow-laden mountains of Norway, where winter stretches endlessly and the slopes seem to whisper with the voices of the past, there is a legend that haunts skiers and mountaineers alike: the phantom skier. This ghostly figure is said to appear without warning, gliding silently across the frozen landscape, and those who follow him are never seen again. The phantom skier is described as a tall, shadowy figure, dressed in old-fashioned ski gear that seems to shimmer faintly in the moonlight. His face is obscured by a scarf and goggles, and his movements are impossibly smooth, as though he isn't bound by the laws of nature. Locals claim that he leads travelers into the treacherous snowfields, where avalanches and icy crevasses await. The most famous tale of the phantom skier comes from a group of friends who ventured into the Jotunheimen Mountains one winter to explore the remote slopes. The weather was perfect when they set out, clear skies and fresh snow, but as they climbed higher, an unexpected fog rolled in, thick and blinding. The group decided to take a break and wait for the fog to lift. That's when one of them, Anders, spotted a figure moving gracefully through the mist. "Look," he said, pointing. "Someone's skiing ahead." The others squinted into the fog and saw it too, a lone skier moving effortlessly over the snow despite the poor visibility. "Maybe they know the way down," one of the friends suggested. Without a second thought, the group decided to follow the skier. He didn't respond to their calls, but seemed to guide them, weaving through the trees, and across the open slopes. At first, they felt reassured by his presence, but as the hours passed, unease began to creep in. The skier never stopped, never paused to check his surroundings. He glided over the snow as though he knew every inch of the mountain by heart. The group tried to keep up, but the terrain grew more difficult, steeper, icier, and unfamiliar. "We're going the wrong way," one of the friends muttered. But Anders, desperate to believe they were being led to safety, urged them to continue. Then, suddenly, the skier disappeared into the fog. The group rushed forward, expecting to find him just beyond the next ridge. But instead, they found themselves at the edge of a massive crevasse. The ice beneath their feet cracked ominously, and they scrambled to retreat. Panic set in as they realized how far off course they had gone, and the fog made it impossible to retrace their steps. By sheer luck, they managed to find a small cave to shelter in until the fog lifted. When they finally made it back to their starting point, exhausted and shaken, they told their story to the locals. The villagers listened gravely and nodded. "You saw the phantom skier," one of them said. "He leads the lost deeper into the mountains, to places they're not meant to return from." They went on to explain that the phantom skier is believed to be the spirit of a man who died in an avalanche decades ago. Some say he was a guide who became lost in a storm while leading a group of skiers to safety, while others claim he was a reckless adventurer who ignored warnings and paid the ultimate price. To this day, in the remote mountain ranges of Norway, skiers and mountaineers tell stories of spotting a lone figure gliding through the snow. For those who see him, the warning is clear: do not follow. The phantom skier is a reminder that the mountains are as dangerous as they are beautiful, and that not all who tread their slopes return. For those who ignore the warnings, the skier's path often leads to a cold and silent end. These chilling tales, told by real people from around the world, remind us of the mysteries hidden in the ice and snow. If you enjoyed these stories, like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Stay safe and stay warm.